Hi, guys. Today in class, we talked about a variable in an experiment. And variables are parts of the lab that we really haven't talked about yet, but are really important to making sure that you have a lab that's reliable and fair. So let's take a look at the next slide. It says to be fair in an experiment, only one thing should be changed at a time. So let's think about it. If I'm growing plants and I wanted to test how sun affected the plants, I'd have to keep everything else the same, right? If I change the amount of sun, like maybe a plant got shade, maybe a plant got half sun a part of the day, and the other plant got a whole bunch of sun, that would be different, right? And I would know for sure that if I kept those that way, that it would be about the sun. And if I kept the water and the time that they were by the window and the pot that I grew them in the same, then I would know that the plants differed in their growth based on the water they got. So in an experiment, we only change one thing. And that one thing that we change is called a variable. And I know that might be a little confusing right now, but let's talk about what those are and then we'll do some examples. Okay, so there are three kinds of variables in every experiment. First, there's what's called an independent variable. That's what you change in an experiment. So if I did an experiment and I wanted to see how sun affected plants, the amount of sun would be the thing that I change, and then everything else stays the same. My dependent variable is what data or results I'm looking for. So at the end of my experiment, what will tell me or show me what happened? What data am I going to look at? Well, if I'm doing the plant experiment, the data that I'm going to look at is how tall the plant grew. So that would be the dependent variable. The dependent variable depends on what you do in the independent variable. So depending on what you change, the dependent variable depends on the independent change that you make. The last one is called the constant. If you think about what the word constant means, it means you do it constantly, right? Like if I say, I'm constantly wiggling my leg when I'm listening or something like that, that means that I'm doing it all the time. So constant means something that you're doing to every single part of the lab. So a constant is what stays the same. So if I were doing that water growing experiment, I would change the sun, right, and the amount of sun that I got, but my constant would be everything I have to keep the same to make sure the experiment is just about the sun. So I would keep the same water amount, I would keep the same soil, the same pot, the same amount of seeds, everything would stay the same. So let's go through and let's do two examples and that we did in class and see if we can figure out what the answers are. Then your homework is to complete the assignment online. And if you're in class, you do the paper version. Okay, let's see if I can get this. Hopefully this works. Okay, so let's take a look at this. It says a group of kids was given eggs every day for breakfast for a month, while another group was given oatmeal every day for a month. So picture our class. Half got eggs every morning, half got oatmeal. Researchers tracked their math grades to see which breakfast might help brain function the most. So then researchers said, hey, how did the oatmeal group do on their math problems? How did the eggs group do? Is it possible that that food affected their brain? So we go and try to figure out what the variables are. The first variable we're going to try to figure out is called the IV, or the independent variable. If you remember from our example, the independent variable is what you change in an experiment. So, what's changing in this experiment for the kids? Well, if you think about it, what's actually changing? What they have for breakfast. So, I would say eggs versus oatmeal. What they have for breakfast is the change I'm making, right? Okay, what's the dependent variable? That's the data that I'm looking for, the results I'm looking for. So what's going to tell me whether the eggs or the oatmeal works? Usually, if I see eggs and oatmeal, and that's my independent variable, something else in the sentence is usually the dependent. And that's usually when it talks about what they collect or what they track. So researchers tracked their math grades. That's the dependent variable. That's what I'm looking for in the end. I'm going to look at whose math grades are better. That's the results or the data I'm looking for. The last one is the constants. If you remember, constants means what stays the same. Everything else that stays the same. This could be multiple answers. So let's think about some. What would have to stay the same? Well, maybe the amount of eggs or oatmeal that you give every day would have to stay the same. Probably the time that the groups eat would have to be the same, right? Because if a group eats at 8 a.m. versus 10 a.m., that might change their math scores. You want to keep the same math problems, right? Because if I give one group calculus and the other one 1 plus 1, it's going to be really obvious who is better, and it might not be because of the eggs or the oatmeal, right? So there's the first example. Independent variables, what I change. Dependent's the data I'm looking for, what I'm trying to track or measure. Constants are things, other things in the experiment that I have to keep the same. So the experiment is just about the change in eggs versus oatmeal. Okay, let's do the next one. The next one is Billy and Bob want to know if the amount of baking soda they add to vinegar will affect the height of a rocket launch. So I don't know if you've ever done this before, but if you can combine vinegar and baking soda and shake it up a little bit, it can fly like a little water bottle rocket up, or a cap of some kind, because the combination of that creates enough gas and momentum of the liquid and the material to be able to push something into the air. So let's take a look at this. What is my IV, or my independent variable? Well, if we look at what independent variable means, it means what I change in an experiment. So, what did we change? Let's look at this again. Billy and Bob want to know if the amount of baking soda added to vinegar will affect the height a rocket goes. So, we think of what's actually changing. Some people would say, oh, it's the height of the rocket that's changing, but it's what the experimenter changes. So, what am I actually changing? The only thing I have control over is the amount of baking soda. So, that's my independent variable. Okay. My dependent variable, if you remember, is what my data or results are. So, what am I trying to measure? In the end, what will tell me if baking soda amounts differ and change the height of the rocket? Well, if I look at something else, it will say added to vinegar, that's not going to change. Will affect the blank of the rocket. Anytime it affects something, that's the dependent. So, height of the rocket is the dependent, because how high it goes will tell me what amount of baking soda works the best, right? Okay? And then the last one is the constants. Constants, if you remember, are what stays the same. So, what's going to have to stay the same no matter how much baking soda I use or how little? What has to stay the same? So, maybe I would say the brand of vinegar should be the same in every kind. The brand of baking soda should be the same in every kind. I should probably use the same kind of rocket, right? Because if I use one rocket versus another, the experiment could be based on the different types of rockets working better and not the baking soda, right? So there could be, maybe I want to have the same weather conditions when I set it off outside, right? I don't want a windy day versus a really sunny, not windy day, because the results might be different, okay? So there's how you do variables, all right? If you need to go back and open up this presentation while you do the homework, that might be a good idea to help you remember, okay? So go back to Google Classroom. You're going to go to the homework, the Google Slides, and you're going to work on the homework for tonight. Okay, good luck.